My name is Claire Whitmore. I was 36 years old the night my phone buzzed on the nightstand at 11 minutes past 10, and the screen said one thing that made my blood go cold before I'd even sat up. Rosie. Please come. I haven't eaten. 5 words. No punctuation after the last one. The kind of message a child sends when she has already rehearsed it 50 times and is still not sure she is allowed to send it at all. Rosie was 9 years old. She was my niece. She lived 2 hours north in a village called Ashfield Green, in a detached house with a double garage and a garden her grandparents kept immaculate, and for the past 18 months I had been told, cheerfully, consistently, and in the same warm voice every single time, that she was thriving. I was already out of bed. I pulled on my coat over my pajamas, grabbed my car keys off the hook by the door, and then I stopped in the hallway because I needed 1 second. Just one. To make sure I did this correctly. Because I am a forensic accountant by trade, and the first thing that work teaches you, the very first thing, is that the moment you let panic drive, you make mistakes you cannot take back. I breathed in. I breathed out. Then I got in the car and drove. Welcome to my channel, where ordinary people make impossible choices, and quiet courage outlasts every cruelty. If stories about standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves are why you're here, hit subscribe, and drop a comment. I read every single one. The road north at that hour is mostly dark. The motorway becomes an A road becomes a country lane, and by the time I turned into Ashfield Green the trees were pressing close on both sides and the rain had come on properly, the kind of English October rain that is less weather and more a personal grievance. I had time to think. Too much time. The question I kept pushing away kept coming back. How does a 9-year-old end up sending that message at that hour? I had given Rosie the phone myself, 8 months ago, after one particular Sunday visit had left me too uneasy to sleep. A basic thing, a cheap handset with my number and her father's number and a top-up card I renewed each month. My mother had laughed when she found out. She's got the whole family round her, Claire. What does she need a phone for? I hadn't been able to explain it in words that would land. Old habit. I have always been the person in our family who plans for the thing nobody wants to plan for. For 18 months, every time I asked to visit, the answer had been the same. Rosie was settling. Rosie needed routine. Rosie was doing brilliantly and too many visitors would unsettle her. I had offered twice to have her come and stay with me for the summer holidays. My mother had said, in the gentle but absolute way she has always had, that children need one home, not a revolving door. I had believed them. They were her grandparents. They had taken her in without hesitation after the accident. What kind of person suspects that? The kind who has spent 12 years finding money that was never supposed to be found. The porch light was off. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled onto the driveway. My parents have lived in that house for 22 years, and the porch light is never off. My mother considers a dark front step a sign of poor housekeeping. I knocked. Then tried the handle. The door opened. The house was cold. Not the cold of a British evening where someone has simply let the heating go off. This was the cold of a house where the thermostat has been managed very carefully by people who are not the ones sitting in it. I called out. No answer from upstairs. No television on. Just the kitchen light, pale and yellow, at the end of the hall. Rosie was sitting on the bottom stair in a thin long-sleeved top and her school socks, knees pulled up to her chest, the phone clutched in both hands. She looked up when I came in. She didn't cry. I want to pause there, because if you have ever been around small children, you will know that a child of 9 who has been frightened and hungry and alone does not, ordinarily, hold it together when a trusted adult finally walks through the door. They fall apart with relief. They let it out. Rosie didn't cry. She looked at me the way a person looks when they have learned, somewhere deep and early, that falling apart is a luxury they have not been permitted. They've gone out, she said. Grandma said they'd be back before I was asleep. I asked when she'd eaten. She thought about it. The thinking was its own answer. I went to the kitchen. The fridge door opened with the kind of reluctant hum of an appliance that hasn't had much to keep cold. Inside, a half-empty pint of semi-skimmed milk 4 days past its use-by date, a jar of pickle with the lid unsealed, 2 eggs, and the end of a loaf of Hovis in a twisted bag. I checked the freezer, a bag of oven chips and one of those microwave rice packets. I turned to the pantry. It was padlocked. A padlock. On the pantry door. In a house with a brand new 55-inch television mounted on the dining room wall, I could see it from where I stood, and a patio set through the French doors that I did not recognize, all-weather rattan, the kind that costs the better part of £1,000. I made Rosie scrambled eggs on toast. And while they cooked, she reached into her school bag and set something on the counter with the particular care of someone managing resources. A sandwich bag. Inside it, a digestive biscuit, a few crackers, the corner of a cereal bar. In case, she said, and didn't say what. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, anger would come later, and I would deal with it the way I deal with everything. What shifted was the thing that shifts when a column of figures suddenly makes sense. When the number you've been staring at stops being abstract. When the account has a name. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Car doors. My mother's voice, laughing at something before she even reached the front step. Barbara came in first. Cream wool coat, a carrier bag from a department store on her arm, still smiling at whatever the joke had been. She saw me and the smile didn't fade, it stopped, cleanly, like a power cut. Claire. What on earth are you doing here? My father followed. Gerald, broader, slower, smelling of the pub and the particular brand of cigarettes he has smoked since I was a teenager. He looked at Rosie's plate. He looked at me. His jaw set. I kept my voice level. I asked about the pantry lock. I asked about the food. I asked why a 9-year-old had been left alone on a school night. My mother's face performed an expression I have watched it perform my entire life, the slow rearrangement into wounded patience. She's not a toddler, Claire. She knows to ring 999 if there's an emergency. I asked again about the food. My mother said the thing that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. Said it lightly. Reasonably. The tone of someone who has thought about this and arrived at a satisfying conclusion. She's fed and she's warm and she's got a roof. What more does a child need? I looked at the television. I looked at the patio furniture through the glass. I looked at Rosie, who had gone very still over her plate. My father stepped between me and the hallway. Not aggressively, just positioned himself. The way a person positions themselves when they have thought about this moment in advance. You walked away from this family, he said. You don't get to walk back in and start pointing fingers. I understood, standing in that cold kitchen, that they had rehearsed this. Not these exact words, but the posture of it. The certainty that I was the intruder and they were the wronged party. I have audited people who embezzled from their employers for a decade and smiled at the Christmas party, and I know the difference between guilt and grievance. Guilty people flinch. These two felt interrupted. I picked up my coat. I said goodnight to Rosie and crouched down to her level and told her, quietly, to keep that phone charged and to keep it with her. She nodded. On my way out I saw it, propped against the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter, the bowl that contained no fruit. A travel brochure. Glossy. A couple in white standing against a Caribbean sunset. 7 nights. Ocean view stateroom. Next to it, the receipt from the department store bag my mother had walked in with, and the instruction manual for the television, still in its wrapper. I didn't pick anything up. I just looked, the way I look at a balance sheet when one line doesn't add up to the rest. A household that cannot keep a pint of milk in date. A pantry that has to be locked against a child. And a 7-night cruise with an ocean view balcony. My mother caught me looking. We work hard, she said, sharper now. We're allowed nice things. No one had said they weren't. I said goodnight. I walked to my car. I sat in the dark for 60 seconds without turning the key, and I did the thing I do when a number won't leave me alone. I wrote it down. Cruise, ocean view, 7 nights. New television. Patio furniture. Carrier bag, department store. Padlocked pantry. Expired milk. A child who packs emergency crackers in her school bag. I didn't know yet where the money was coming from. But I knew it was coming from somewhere. And I knew children don't generate income. And I knew exactly who in that house thought I would never check. I drove the 2 hours back to Bristol with the rain hard on the windscreen, and somewhere past the services on the M5, the accountant in me took over from the ant, and the fury, which had been rising since the moment I saw that padlock, went quiet and useful. What did I know, factually? A child's mother had died. That child was in the care of her maternal grandparents. The child was being neglected, not struck, not bruised, but neglected, which is quieter and harder to prove and exactly as real. And there was money in that house that had no visible source. Here is what I pieced together over the next 3 days. When Rosie's mother, my sister-in-law Joanna, died in the car accident that also put my brother in hospital for 6 weeks, Rosie became eligible for a DWP guardian's allowance. A payment made to the person raising a child whose parents have died. It is not a large amount, but it lands every week, reliable as a tide, and it exists entirely for the child's benefit. On top of that, Joanna had held a life insurance policy through her employer, not enormous, but meaningful, and the payout had been placed into a discretionary trust managed by, I discovered after some careful searching, my father. 2 income streams. Both with one legal purpose, Rosie's welfare, education, and needs. Both flowing into the same household as that padlocked pantry. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning with a cold cup of tea and the particular feeling I get when a case stops being a suspicion and starts being a shape. I couldn't pull financial records from my laptop, that would require a court order, and I knew it. But I could reconstruct the outline. I knew the approximate amounts. I knew the dates the payments would clear. And I could see, in the photographs I had taken on my phone on the way out of that kitchen, the receipt, the brochure, that the spending patterns in that house were entirely inconsistent with 2 people on a pension managing their own modest income. The cruise had been booked 4 days after a monthly payment date. I checked. Then I sat back and looked at the ceiling. I have spent 12 years doing this work. There is always a gap between what a person says they can afford and what they actually spend. That gap is never random. It always means something. I tried the kind way first. I want to say that plainly, because the people who love control always tell the story afterwards as if you came at them with weapons. I rang my mother on a Sunday afternoon and kept everything easy and warm. I said I'd love to have Rosie come and stay, give them a proper break, get her to a GP for a checkup, maybe look at her school situation. I offered to set up a direct payment for groceries. No strings. Just to help. My mother's voice went 10 degrees cooler in 2 seconds. We don't need your money, Claire. I said it wasn't about need, it was about Rosie. Rosie is fine. You saw her on one difficult night and decided you knew best. As usual. Then my Aunt Margaret got on the line, my mother's older sister, who has been the chorus to every performance my mother has ever given, and she told me, in the gentle tone of someone offering useful perspective, that Rosie was a sensitive little thing who cried for attention and that I was reading far too much into one phone message. I asked Margaret, very calmly, when she had last looked inside that fridge. There was a pause. Then my mother again. Flat, final. If you keep pushing this, we'll move. New school, new town, and you won't know where she is. She said it. And then she didn't take it back. I told her I'd think about everything she'd said, and I rang off, and I sat for a long moment with the phone on the table. People who are certain they've done nothing wrong don't threaten to disappear. What my mother had just done was hand me the single most useful piece of information in the whole situation. She knew she was exposed. The following morning I sent a formal written request, polite, careful, copied to no one, asking to see the records of how the guardian's allowance had been used, and the trust accounts for the insurance payout. I framed it as concern, not accusation. I made no threats. I just asked the paper to speak. My father replied by email. He told me the finances were none of my business, that the DWP had no concerns, and that if I contacted any agency or authority, he would make certain I never saw Rosie again. I read that email 4 times. A clean account hands you the receipts and says good riddance. A clean account does not threaten to hide the child. What he had sent me, signed with his own name, was what I call in my work a consciousness of guilt. I saved it, printed it, and placed it in a folder. I built the case the way I build every case. Methodically. Without theater. I requested Rosie's school records, which I was entitled to as a close family member, and they told a quiet, devastating story. 14 absences in the autumn term. Her name on the free school meals register, which I was grateful existed, and sick that it was her only reliable meal. A note from her class teacher, a young woman who had clearly been worried for months. Rosie has on several occasions asked if she could take leftover lunch items home. She has also fallen asleep in afternoon lessons on multiple occasions. Flagged with Senko but no further action taken. The medical picture was the same silence, louder. No GP visit in 14 months. A dental appointment missed and not rescheduled. A repeat prescription for a minor respiratory condition that had expired and, as far as the surgery could tell me, not been renewed. None of it was a bruise. All of it was a pattern. And patterns are what I do. I called the family law department of a firm in Bristol I had done forensic work for, and I asked, hypothetically, what it would take. The answer was honest and not encouraging. Courts move carefully. Courts favor stability. Courts do not remove a child from grandparents on the word of an aunt who lives 2 hours away, regardless of what the fridge looks like. I would need it documented. I would need it corroborated. I would need it airtight. So I made it airtight. And every few nights, I rang a small Nokia handset in a village in the Cotswolds, and a little girl answered on the first ring, like she'd been holding it. We'd talk for a few minutes about nothing, a drawing she'd done, a library book. And then, in the offhand way children tell you the worst things, the details would come. The pantry was locked because Grandma said she had no self-control around snacks. She didn't have a winter coat that fit properly, last year's was still zipped to the wrist if she stretched her arms down. Some evenings she was asked to stay in her room with the light off while the adults had people over, so she didn't get in the way. She had started keeping a small amount of food in her school bag because she'd been hungry enough on a Saturday once to feel faint, and she didn't want to feel that again. She said that last part like it was simply sensible. Like it was problem-solving, not the saddest thing I'd ever heard. One evening, she went quiet mid-sentence. "Auntie Claire," she said. "There's a contact in here that says Dad." My brother Thomas had been living in Aberdeen for the past year. The family story, the one I'd been given and had half accepted because I'd been too far away and too busy and too exhausted to interrogate it, was that after Joanna died, Thomas had fallen apart so completely that he'd walked away. Gone north, cut contact, couldn't cope. I had half believed it because believing it was easier than the alternative. But here was his number, alive in his daughter's phone. "Have you ever called it?" I asked. "Grandma took it out of my contacts," Rosie said. "I put it in the notes section instead." She was 9 years old, hiding her father's phone number in the notes section of a cheap handset, under a contact labeled school project, because she already understood that the adults in charge of her were not safe with information. I told her I loved her, said I'd ring tomorrow, and hung up. Then I called the number. It rang 4 times. A man answered who sounded older than my little brother and exactly like him. I said his name. There was a silence long enough that I thought the line had dropped. "Claire." His voice broke on the word. "Is Rosie all right?" And the entire story I had been told for 18 months came apart in my hands. Thomas had not walked away. After Joanna died, he had come very close to not surviving the grief himself, close enough that he had checked himself into a treatment program in Edinburgh, voluntarily, because he knew Rosie needed him functional and he was not functional. He had left Rosie with our parents because they had offered, had insisted, had told him it was the right thing while he got well and that they would care for her as if she were their own. He had been sending money north every single month. He had called constantly. They had told him Rosie was thriving, that disrupting her routine with too many calls would confuse her, that he should focus on getting well. They had told me he had abandoned his daughter. They had told him I had distanced myself from the family and wanted nothing to do with it. They had stood between a father and a sister and a child, fed each of us a different lie, and collected from every direction. I tried to come back in February, Thomas said. I called the house for 3 weeks and it went to voicemail every time. I thought they'd changed the number. They hadn't changed the number. They'd blocked his. I heard my brother cry from 400 miles away, and I made myself keep my voice steady, because one of us had to. Come home, I told him. I need you in a courtroom. I found a family solicitor named Rachel Okafor, who worked from an office above a dry cleaner's in Clifton and had the kind of reputation that comes from winning cases nobody else thought were winnable. She read my ledger, the full one I had built over 3 weeks, dates down the left side, money in, money out, a child's needs unmet alongside 2 adults once met in full, without a word. Pushed it back across the desk. Looked at me over the top of her glasses. You've done most of my job for me, she said. Let's talk about the rest of it. We filed a petition for emergency guardianship, citing Rosie's welfare and the pattern of neglect the documents showed. Alongside it, we formally requested, through the court, the full accounts for the guardian's allowance and the insurance trust. And we referred the financial picture to the relevant DWP department for review. My parents felt it the moment the letter arrived. The phone calls to Rosie became difficult. She'd answer in a whisper, then go quiet, then the line would drop. One evening she managed a single text before they took the phone. They took my charger. My mother rang Rachel's office herself, sweet as anything, to say there had been a misunderstanding and of course she was happy to discuss things sensibly. And then, almost in the same breath, mentioned that she and my father were considering a move to be closer to family in Scotland, for Rosie's stability. Wouldn't want all this legal business to make that complicated? Rachel translated it for me in one sentence. She just told us she's a flight risk. On a call to a solicitor's office. Which is recorded. We filed for an emergency residence order that same afternoon. The welfare check came first. A social worker from the county team, a woman I never met but whose report I have now read perhaps 30 times, attended the property unannounced on a Tuesday morning. She documented what she found. The near-empty fridge. The padlocked pantry in a house with a new television and outdoor furniture and a cruise booking confirmation on the kitchen counter. Rosie's clothing, too small, a coat with the cuffs at the forearm. And then the detail the social worker wrote up in her own words, in the section marked additional concerns. During the visit, the child was found to have stored small quantities of food in multiple locations in her bedroom, beneath her mattress, in a coat pocket, in a small zip bag in her school satchel. Items included biscuits, crackers, and a piece of fruit. The child stated she kept food in her room, just in case. Food hiding behavior of this nature is consistent with a child experiencing chronic food insecurity, regardless of household income. You can argue with an aunt's testimony. You can dismiss a concerned phone call. You cannot argue with the body language of a 9-year-old who has decided she cannot trust the adults in her house to feed her. The bank records arrived via court order the week before the hearing, and they confirmed every reconstruction I had made, down to the date. The cruise, booked 4 days after the monthly payment cleared. Casino visits, yes, a local casino, a regular habit, clustered at the beginning of each month, when the accounts were freshest. Salon appointments. Catalog orders. The full transaction history of 2 people spending a child's money as though it were an apology they were owed. I built the exhibit that Friday night. One clean timeline. Whoever sat in that courtroom and looked at it would not need an accounting background. They would need 30 seconds and a functioning conscience. The hearing was held at Bristol Family Court on a grey November morning. My parents sat with their barrister, a smooth man in a good suit who had clearly been briefed to project quiet outrage on their behalf. My Aunt Margaret sat behind them, hands folded. A few cousins in the gallery. Thomas sat beside me in a jacket he'd borrowed and a quiet he had earned. Rachel set our binder on the table without ceremony. Their barrister opened with the story my parents had been telling for 18 months. Two devoted grandparents on a fixed income who had taken in a bereaved grandchild without hesitation. A son who had abandoned his daughter in her darkest hour. An aunt who had never shown up until now, when, for reasons he implied were less than charitable, she suddenly wanted to take over. He used the word stability the way a conjurer uses a prop. Repeatedly, with feeling, hoping the repetition would substitute for evidence. Then Rachel stood up and said that the documentary record told a rather different story, and asked if she might walk the court through it. We put the exhibit on the screen. I answered the judge's questions in the flat, specific register I use with clients. No adjectives. No editorializing. Just dates and figures. Here is the guardian's allowance payment. Here is the date it cleared. Here is the cruise booking confirmation, Ocean View, 7 nights, made 4 days later. Here are the casino transactions, consistent across 11 months, timed to the start of each monthly cycle. Here is the trust account for the insurance payout, showing irregular withdrawals with no receipts filed. And here, I let the silence sit, is the line for the child. Clothing, shoes, medical, food. I let the court see how short that line was. Then the school records. The absences. The free school meals. The teacher's note about a child asking to take leftover sandwiches home. Then the medical gaps. 14 months without a GP visit. The lapsed prescription. Then the social worker's photographs, the fridge, the pantry lock, the coat with the cuffs at the forearm. And then one last thing. I had flagged Rosie's phone as evidence early and asked Rachel to have it formally preserved. The call logs had been extracted. 18 attempted calls to Thomas's number over 6 months. Every single one of them made on days the phone records showed her grandparents were out of the house. She had been trying to reach her father in the gaps when it was safe to try. I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. There is a particular quiet that descends over a room when a story everyone has half believed meets a fact it cannot accommodate. I watched it happen. I watched the cousins in the gallery stop making eye contact with each other. I watched the barrister stop writing. I watched my mother, who had been pressing a handkerchief to the corner of one eye for the gallery, lower the handkerchief. Rachel asked me, for the record, to repeat what my mother had said on the night I found Rosie alone, about the child's needs. I repeated it exactly, in the same level voice. She said the child was fed and warm and had a roof over her head, and asked what more a child could need. Rachel let it sit. Then she gestured at the screen, at the cruise, the casino statements, the photographs of the empty fridge, and said quietly, "The record now shows us precisely what Mrs. Pierce believed a child needed. And precisely what she chose to spend the child's money on instead." I watched that sentence travel across the room. The cousin who had grabbed my arm at a birthday party last Christmas and whispered, "She's doing her best, Claire, don't make things difficult," she looked at the bank statement on the screen and then down at her own hands. My mother broke in stages. First the tears, practiced, accompanied by the little gold cross she had worn specifically for today, pressed between finger and thumb. When the judge's face remained neutral, the tears became grievance. Thomas left that little girl. He walked away. We sacrificed everything and nobody gives us a moment's credit. When that found no purchase, the anger surfaced, the real thing, the engine underneath all the other performances. She turned to me across the courtroom. "You have always thought you were better than this family. Always. You've never once been here when we needed you and now you want to swoop in and play the hero." Her barrister put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. My father leaned forward and delivered the line he has used on me since I was 19 years old. The line that has closed every argument, ended every telephone call, been the final word in every room. "You walked away from this family," he said. "You don't have a say." The judge set down her pen. "Mr. Pierce," she said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has heard every version of this in every courtroom and is not impressed by any of them. "The say is mine. I've seen the record." My father opened his mouth. He closed it. For the first time in my life, I watched that sentence not work. I watched him sit back in his chair as though the floor had shifted, and I watched the certainty he had carried for 40 years, the absolute assurance that he was owed deference, that he set the terms, that his word was the last word. I watched it meet something harder than itself. The room was very quiet. Thomas spoke next. My brother stood up in his borrowed jacket and spoke for 12 minutes without notes, and it was the bravest thing I have ever been in the presence of. He did not perform. He did not ask for sympathy. He told the truth, in order, with the simple directness of a man who has spent 18 months rebuilding himself one difficult day at a time and no longer has the energy for anything other than honesty. He told the court about losing Joanna. About the months afterwards when getting out of bed was a genuine achievement. About the decision to get help before he could not. About the money he had sent home every month, the calls he had made, the voicemails he had left, the return he had been planning and had believed his parents were supporting. He said, "I left my daughter with the people I trusted most in the world. I trusted them because they were my parents, and because the alternative, that they might use her, was not a thought I was able to think." His voice did not break when he said it. It went quieter, which was worse. Then Rachel called a witness the other side had not anticipated. My Aunt Margaret had rung me 3 weeks before the hearing at 11:30 on a Wednesday night. She had talked for a long time in circles, the way people talk when they are working up to the thing they actually need to say. She talked about my mother being the strong one. About how she herself had always gone along. About the small amounts of cash she'd accepted for babysitting over the months, telling herself it was harmless. Then her voice dropped to nearly nothing. "That child does hide food," she said. "I've seen it. I've told myself it was a phase. I don't sleep well anymore, Claire." I had not comforted her. I had noted what she said, as I note everything, and the next morning I had told Rachel every word. Margaret sat in the witness box with her hands folded on the rail and she told the truth. Not grandly. Not bravely. She told it the way people tell the truth when they can no longer bear the weight of the lie, quietly, with the understanding that it would not make her a good person, only a slightly less culpable one. She said she had seen the food hoarding. She had seen the pantry locked. She had seen Rosie eat hungrily at her house on the Sundays she visited in a way that suggested the child hadn't had enough. "I told myself," she said, "that it wasn't my place. That Carol knew what she was doing. That Rosie was a dramatic child who exaggerated." A pause. "She's 9. It was my place." It broke the last thing holding my parents' version of events upright. You could feel it happen, the moment the story stopped being structurally sound. The judge took 20 minutes. When she came back, she spoke clearly. The evidence of financial misuse and chronic neglect was, in her assessment, substantial and well documented. She was transferring residence to Thomas, Rosie's father, with immediate effect. A structured transition, supervised initially, stepping up as Thomas demonstrated the stability he was, frankly, already demonstrating. I was named a supporting guardian, with defined visitation rights and a standing role in Rosie's welfare decisions, so that she would never again be one closed door away from an adult who was fighting for her. The financial matter, the misuse of the guardian's allowance and the insurance trust, would be referred to the DWP and, given the amounts involved, to the Crown Prosecution Service for review. I had not asked for them to go to prison. I had asked for Rosie to sit at a table with food on it and for Thomas to be allowed to ring his daughter. Those things were happening now. My mother didn't say anything when the judge finished. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and the little gold cross between her fingers, and the performance, the cardigan, the handkerchief, the soft voice she had used in every room where an audience was possible, all of it had simply stopped. What was underneath it was something I didn't have a name for. Not guilt, exactly. Not grief. Something smaller and harder and very cold. My father stared at the table. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked away. The first night, Thomas and Rosie and I ate dinner at my kitchen table in Bristol. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and a Victoria sponge I had bought from the bakery on White Ladies Road for no occasion except that there was one. Rosie ate with the focus of a child who has spent too long being uncertain about food, quickly at first, then slowly, watching the serving dish, calculating. Then, somewhere in the middle of the sponge, I watched something in her face shift. The calculation stopped. She had a second slice. She didn't ask permission. That shift, that small, ordinary, enormous thing, was the reason for all of it. She still keeps her phone next to her bed at night. Old habit. I don't push her to stop. Some habits protect you for long enough that the body holds onto them even when the thread is gone. She'll find her way out of it in her own time, with her dad downstairs and food in every cupboard and nobody, who would ever put a padlock on a pantry door. My parents kept their house. The DWP review found significant misuse across 3 years and they have been required to repay the full amount on a schedule that will be uncomfortable for a very long time. The CPS is still reviewing the trust situation. That is not my courtroom, but it is an open door, and I am in no hurry to see it closed. Margaret wrote me a letter. 4 pages, mostly about herself, as letters written out of guilt tend to be. I read it and I didn't write back. But I kept it. She told the truth when it mattered, late and for mixed reasons, after 2 years of looking away. I've decided that's a real thing, even when it's not a clean thing. We don't see my parents. Someday, perhaps, if Rosie chooses, when she's old enough to make that choice with full information and no one managing her feelings on the matter, she can decide. Some doors you leave shut until the person they were closed against is the one holding the key. There's a line I've been thinking about since the night I drove north in the rain with my hands at 10 and 2 and a bad feeling I was right to trust. It isn't a clever line. It's just the truth of the thing. Blood makes you relatives. Showing up, building the case, sitting in the cold car park, ringing the cracked phone, driving in the rain, that's what makes you family. That's my story. One message. 5 words. No punctuation after the last one. And a folder of facts that spoke louder than anything else in that courtroom ever could. If this reminded you of a child someone might not be checking on, a quiet one, a careful one who packs their own emergency supplies and has learned very young not to cry, take it as your sign to stop and look. It might be nothing. It might not be. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.